The cafe went silent when 5 black SUVs slid to the curb, engines humming like a warning. Every head turned as a man stepped out, tattoos crawling up his neck, power radiating off him. He looked straight at the old woman Shanann had been serving for months and said one word that shattered her world. "Mama." The next second, he turned to Shanann, the waitress who'd unknowingly fed his mother, and whispered, "You take care of her, or I'll take care of you." But his eyes didn't hold a threat. They held a secret, one that would drag Shanann into a world where kindness could kill. Before we begin, please take a moment to support this channel by clicking the like, share, and subscribe button so you can keep enjoying awesome stories like this. Thank you. Shanann Price didn't believe in miracles anymore. At 26, her life was measured in coffee cups, rent receipts, and the number of hours she could stay upright before collapsing. The cobblestone cafe where she worked wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. A place where time moved as slowly as the drip of espresso, and where hope came served with extra sugar. Every morning at precisely 8 o'clock, Shanann's world began again. Open the cafe, tie the apron, breathe through the exhaustion, smile anyway. The regulars came and went. The same faces, the same orders, the same quiet gossip. Except for one, Agnes Hernandez, an elderly woman with silver hair and trembling hands who always sat by the terrace window, a waffle and a black coffee in front of her. She never asked for much, just company. And Shanann, for reasons she couldn't quite explain, always lingered at her table an extra minute, to refill the cup, straighten the napkin, or just to listen. There was something regal about Agnes. The way she spoke, soft yet commanding, like someone who'd lived through too many storms and still found a way to sit in the sun. Over 6 months, their quiet ritual became the gentlest part of Shanann's life. When Agnes's hands shook too much to hold the syrup bottle, Shanann wordlessly helped her pour. When the cafe ran out of flowers, Shanann plucked one from her own balcony vase just to see her smile. It wasn't much, just kindness, the kind that costs time instead of money. Sometimes Shanann noticed a black sedan idling across the street, tinted windows, engine purring like a watchful beast. She assumed it was a regular customer, maybe a businessman working nearby. She didn't know the car never left until Agnes did. She didn't know the old woman's breakfast companion wasn't random at all. And she didn't know kindness, when given to the wrong stranger, could be deadly. It happened on a Wednesday. The smell of fresh waffles hung in the air when the cafe windows began to tremble. One by one, conversations faltered. Outside, 5 black SUVs rolled to a stop like the city itself had been put on hold. The door opened, and the man who stepped out wasn't the kind who ordered coffee. Dark shirt unbuttoned at the throat, tattoos curling up his neck, eyes like cold amber. Power and danger entered the room before he even spoke. Then he did. "Mama." The word froze Shanann in place. Agnes's cup rattled in its saucer. "Alfredo," she whispered, and for the first time, Shanann saw fear in the old woman's eyes. Everyone in the cafe held their breath. The waitress and the mob boss locked eyes for just a second, long enough for him to notice the tremor in her hand, the defiance in her stare. When he turned to leave with his mother, he paused at the door. "You take care of her," he said quietly, "or I'll take care of you." The door closed. The cafe exhaled. Shanann's hands were still trembling, but it wasn't fear alone. Something in that man's voice didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like a warning. That was the morning her life split in two, before the SUVs and after. She thought she'd been serving breakfast. In truth, she'd been serving destiny. The next morning began like all the others, until it didn't. The cafe was half full, its usual blend of quiet chatter, spoons clinking against porcelain, and the faint hiss of the espresso machine. Outside, the cobblestone street glistened from last night's rain, catching the early light like a wet mirror. Shanann moved with practiced rhythm, balancing 2 plates of waffles in one hand and a steaming pot of coffee in the other. Agnes sat in her usual place under the terrace umbrella, bundled in a brown cardigan, smiling faintly as pigeons scuffled near her feet. It was a scene of calm so delicate it could have shattered from a whisper. Then came the sound, low, distant, growing. Engines. Not one, but several, heavy and synchronized. A sound that didn't belong to the morning or to peace. The chatter died before anyone even knew why. Forks froze midair. Heads turned toward the narrow street that wound between the pastel buildings. Shanann looked up from her tray, brows drawn, just as 5 black SUVs appeared, moving in perfect formation. They didn't drive, they prowled. The vehicles stopped directly outside the cafe, their windows blacked out, their presence thick enough to make the air feel smaller. For a long heartbeat, nothing moved. Then the doors opened in unison. Men stepped out, tall, suited, silent. They fanned out with military precision, scanning every doorway, every window. One touched his earpiece. Another's jacket shifted just enough to reveal the dull metal of a gun holstered at his side. A woman at one of the tables gasped and clutched her child's hand. Tourists across the street melted away, pulling out phones but thinking better of it. And then he appeared. From the middle SUV, a man emerged who didn't need an introduction. The air around him seemed to bow in recognition. He wore a black shirt, unbuttoned just enough to reveal tattoos winding up his chest, sharp lines that hinted at violence and history. His sleeves were rolled, exposing veins and scars that looked carved, not healed. His jaw was a weapon of its own, his movements controlled, deliberate, almost feline. When his eyes lifted, amber and unreadable, even the street seemed to hold its breath. He was danger given form, and he was looking straight at Agnes. Mama. The word landed like a gunshot in a church. Agnes's cup rattled in its saucer. The tremor that ran through her hand wasn't from age this time. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came. Alfredo, she whispered finally, her voice thin and trembling. So this was him, the man from the rumors. The one whose name slipped between police radios and late-night news broadcasts like a curse no one wanted to own. Alfredo Hernandez. Shanann didn't realize she'd stepped closer until she was standing between him and Agnes's table, tray still in her hands, knuckles white around the handle. Instinct, not bravery. Something in her, some quiet, irrational part, couldn't stand the fear in Agnes's eyes. Alfredo's gaze cut to her like a blade, assessing. He didn't speak, didn't blink. The silence stretched, so long it hummed. Then, slowly he smiled. It wasn't kind. It wasn't cruel. It was curiosity wrapped in power. You must be the waitress, he said, his voice low, smooth, and dangerous in the way a whisper from a storm might be. The one my men told me about. Shanann's throat went dry. She just came for breakfast, she managed. That's all. One of his guards shifted behind him, and the subtle movement was enough to make Shanann's pulse spike. But Alfredo raised a hand. A simple gesture that made everyone still. Even his men obeyed silence when he commanded it. He turned his attention back to Agnes. You shouldn't have left the apartment, Mama. I needed fresh air, Agnes said softly, though her eyes never quite met his. You can't cage the sky, Alfredo. His jaw tightened, a flicker of frustration beneath control. You know it's not safe for you out here. Safe? She repeated, her tone laced with weary irony. From you or for you? For a moment, something cracked in Alfredo's face. A fracture between menace and something human. But it vanished as quickly as it came. He nodded toward his men. We're leaving. Agnes hesitated. Her hand brushed the edge of the table, as if searching for something to hold on to. Shanann stepped forward, steadying her arm before she could fall. It was automatic. Thoughtless. Human. And that was when Alfredo really looked at her. His eyes lingered, not with lust, not with admiration, but with confusion, like he couldn't understand what kind of person would stand between him and fear. Shanann felt it. That weight of scrutiny, and still she didn't move. Agnes whispered, Thank you, dear. Alfredo's attention flicked to his mother's trembling smile, then back to Shanann. His expression shifted again, softer this time, almost imperceptibly. He reached into his jacket. For one horrifying instant, Shanann thought he was pulling a weapon. Instead, he took out a handkerchief and placed it on the table beside Agnes's untouched waffle. "Finish your coffee," he said quietly. "We'll talk in the car." He looked at Shanann once more, his tone deceptively gentle. "You take care of her," he said. A pause, a shadow of a smirk. "Or I'll take care of you." And then he was gone. The door shut behind them with the finality of a slammed verdict. Through the window, Shanann watched the SUVs glide away, their engines swallowing the morning as if it had never been peaceful at all. The reflection of her own face stared back from the glass, pale, eyes wide, a coffee stain blooming on her apron like blood. The cafe stayed silent long after they left. Someone muttered a prayer. Someone else hurried to pay their bill. Shanann just stood there, staring at the spot where Agnes had been, her heart still hammering in her chest. She didn't know what world she'd just looked into, only that it had looked back. What if the next person you show kindness to drags you into their nightmare? Sometimes danger doesn't crash through your door. It walks in quietly, orders coffee, and calls someone mama. Stay close. Stories like this remind us how fast peace can turn into peril. Agnes Hernandez never came back. For 7 mornings, the table beneath the terrace umbrella sat empty, the coffee cup untouched, the chair slightly off-center, as if still waiting for her to return. Shanann kept glancing toward it between orders, her heart tightening a little more each day. The regulars noticed too. Some whispered about that day with the SUVs. Others avoided the topic altogether. But the cafe felt different now. Heavier, quieter. The smell of waffles no longer covered the lingering scent of fear. Shanann tried to convince herself that Agnes was fine. Maybe Alfredo had taken her somewhere safe. Maybe he was overprotective, not dangerous. But the image of his amber eyes and that soft, terrifying threat, "You take care of her, or I'll take care of you," kept replaying in her mind like a song she couldn't turn off. By the end of the week, the worry had hollowed her out. It was just past closing when it happened. The cafe lights glowed dimly as Shanann wiped down the counter. Rain whispered against the windows. The bell above the door jingled softly, a sound that no longer meant comfort. A man stood there. He wasn't like the rough men who came with Alfredo. This one was older, sharp, polished. His suit looked hand-tailored, his shoes mirror-black. He moved with quiet confidence, not arrogance, and his expression was unreadable. "Miss Price?" he asked, his tone low, formal. Shanann's hand froze on the rack. "Yes." He reached into his coat and produced a small white envelope, sealed with wax stamped with the faint impression of a rose. "This is from Mrs. Hernandez," he said. "She asked that it be delivered by hand. And only to you." Is she all right?" Shanann asked. The man's expression didn't change. "She is safe," he said after a pause that meant too many other things. "Good night, Miss Price." Before she could ask anything else, he was gone, the bell jingling once, then silence. Shanann locked the cafe door and sat at Agnes's empty table, staring at the envelope. Her fingers trembled slightly as she broke the seal. Inside was a single handwritten note, the paper creased as if Agnes had folded it with care. "My dear Shanann, forgive my silence. My son has found me, and with him comes the life I tried to forget. I cannot visit the cafe again, not for a while, perhaps not ever. You gave me mornings that felt human. For that, I am deeply grateful. When you poured my coffee, I remembered what peace felt like. You saw me as a woman, not a ghost from old sins. If anything happens, remember this. Kindness is the rarest currency in my world, and you've spent it well. With love, Agnes H." Shanann read the letter 3 times before realizing her cheeks were wet. She folded it carefully, pressing it to her chest. The cafe's lights flickered once, and in the dim reflection on the window, she saw herself sitting alone, and for the first time, She wondered who exactly she had been serving breakfast to. That night, curiosity turned into need. She searched Agnes Hernandez online, scrolling through pages until one headline made her breath catch. The widow of El Toro. Where is the queen of the coast now? She clicked. Old photographs filled the screen. A black and white portrait of a young, regal woman standing beside a man with a thick mustache and a dangerous grin. Carlos El Toro Hernandez. The article spoke of empire, blood, and betrayal, of ports owned through intimidation, of smuggling routes that built fortunes and graves alike. When Carlos died in an ambush 15 years ago, his son Alfredo inherited everything: the money, the enemies, and the darkness. There were photos of Alfredo too, the same cold eyes, the same presence that had filled the cafe. And at the edge of one old image, barely visible behind the family at a lavish dinner table, was a woman with silver hair and gentle eyes. Agnes. The article mentioned how she vanished after her husband's death, refusing the empire, rejecting her son's ways. She disappeared into anonymity. One line read, asterisk, rumors say she lives like a ghost, unseen, unguarded, perhaps waiting to die in peace. Shanann leaned back, her pulse uneven. The old woman who smiled at her stories, who tipped her with exact change, who spoke of gardens and the smell of sea air, had once been the matriarch of one of the most feared crime families in the country. Her kindness hadn't been random. It had been noticed. And now that world had noticed her back. At midnight, Shanann walked home through narrow streets slick with rain. The city seemed to watch her, shadows leaning, lights flickering, footsteps echoing too close. She quickened her pace, clutching her coat. When she reached her building, she stopped. Something white caught her eye. A single white rose lay on her doormat, droplets of rain glistening on its petals. Beneath it, a folded card. She picked it up slowly, her stomach tightening. You were kind to my mother. That earns you my protection and my attention. A.H. Asterisk. Shanann's breath hitched. The hallway around her was empty, but she felt eyes everywhere, behind the walls, the ceiling, the shadows. She turned the card over, but it was blank. Just the faint scent of tobacco, and something darker clung to it. She placed the rose on her kitchen counter and sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the note under the dim light. Protection. Attention. Two words that could mean safety or surveillance. Her phone buzzed suddenly, startling her. It was a notification from the cafe's security app, movement detected. She opened the feed. The front door camera showed nothing at first, just the rain-soaked street and the faint glow of the sign. Then, slowly, a figure passed under the terrace umbrella. A man in a dark coat paused where Agnes once sat. He placed something on the table, a small white envelope, and vanished into the rain. Shanann's heart thudded. She didn't know if it was a warning, a promise, or the beginning of something she'd never escape. All she knew was this: her life was no longer her own. They say someone's always watching. Sometimes it's danger, sometimes destiny. Shanann just found out the difference the hard way. Follow stories like this, because one day the eyes in the dark might be looking for you. And when they do, you'll want to know what comes next before they do. The cafe had changed, though no one said it out loud. It was in the air now, a quiet tension that clung to every surface like the faint smell of roasted beans and rain-damp cobblestone. Regulars noticed it too. The same faces still filled the seats every morning, but something about them was off, too quiet, too still. The men who now occupied the corner tables weren't tourists or office workers. They wore plain clothes, but their eyes were alert, scanning, calculating. Their hands rested too comfortably near their jackets. Shanann had started calling them the ghosts. They ordered espresso they never drank. They laughed at things no one said. When one left, another appeared within minutes. Always at the same table, always facing the door. She didn't ask questions. She didn't have to. This was Alfredo's doing. He hadn't been back since their strange, charged meeting, but his presence was everywhere, in the shadows that now lived among the steam and chatter. Agnes returned a week later. When the bell chimed that morning, Shanann's heart lifted, then sank again when she saw her. Agnes looked smaller, like life itself had been draining from her. Her silver hair was carefully pinned, but her hands trembled worse than before. Her eyes darted toward the corners of the cafe, as if expecting danger to step out of the light. "Welcome back," Shanann said softly, helping her to her usual seat. Agnes gave a thin smile. "I missed my waffle," she said, voice quivering, "and my friend." Shanann placed her hand over hers. "You should have called. I was worried." "I couldn't," Agnes whispered. "Alfredo insisted I stay hidden for a while. He said things are unsettled." Shanann frowned. "Unsettled how?" Agnes hesitated, looking toward one of the quiet men in the corner before leaning closer. "My son's enemies," she said. "They don't strike him where he's strong. They strike where he's human." Her hand tightened around Shanann's. "They will come for what he loves." Shanann froze, not sure whether to feel fear or disbelief. "Agnes, I'm no one in that world. They don't even know who I am." Agnes smiled sadly. "Oh, child, everyone in his world is someone to someone." The words lingered long after she left that morning. Days passed, and the unease grew roots. The men, Alfredo's watchers, became part of the cafe's rhythm. Their silence was louder than music. Every so often, one would glance at Shanann, give a faint nod, and return to his pretense of reading. She wanted to believe they were protecting her. But from what? Then, one gray afternoon, something changed. It was raining, not a downpour, but a soft, endless drizzle that turned the city to silver. The lunch rush had faded, and Shanann was wiping down the counter when the door creaked open. A man stepped in, not one of Alfredo's. She knew it instantly. He was too casual, too confident. Dressed in a long coat, the collar turned up. His hair was slicked back, his face unremarkable, except for his eyes. Cold, gray, deliberate. "Coffee to go," he said. She poured it without meeting his gaze, heart hammering. When she turned back, he was already gone. But something red lay on the counter where he'd stood. An envelope. Blood red. Sealed with wax. Her hands shook as she picked it up. Inside, a single folded card. The handwriting was sharp, almost elegant. "Leave her, or you'll leave this world." No name. No mark. Only the faint scent of smoke. That night, Shanann couldn't sleep. She sat on the edge of her bed, the red envelope on the table beside her. Rain lashed the windows. Wind whistled through the cracks. She thought about calling Alfredo, but stopped herself. What would she say? "Someone threatened me because of your mother?" No. If she told him, he'd unleash hell on whoever sent it. People would die, maybe innocent ones. And somewhere inside, a quiet voice whispered something worse. Maybe it was already too late. She burned the envelope in her sink, watching the paper curl and blacken. The wax seal melted into a blood-red tear. By morning, nothing was left but ash. The next day, the cafe was busier than ever. People needed warmth, routine, something to hold on to. Shanann smiled, served, and laughed where she could, but her eyes kept drifting to the windows, to the shadows that moved just a little too deliberately outside. Agnes came again, quieter this time. Her hands were wrapped in gloves despite the mild weather. Shanann noticed the bruises on her wrists, faint, circular, like someone had grabbed her too hard. "Are you all right?" she asked, voice low. Agnes stirred her coffee but didn't answer. Then she looked up with a fragile, haunted calm. "Don't get too close, dear," she said. "You have a kind heart. My son's world eats hearts like yours." Shanann tried to protest, but Agnes only smiled. "Promise me one thing. If you ever see those black cars again and Alfredo isn't in them, run." That night, the words replayed in her head like a warning bell. It was almost midnight when she closed the cafe. The streets were empty, glistening with rain. She pulled her coat tight and started the walk home, her shoes splashing in shallow puddles. The city felt different at night, all echo and reflection, full of ghosts that looked like headlights. Halfway down the block, she heard it, the low growl of an engine behind her. She turned. A pair of headlights cut through the rain, too slow, too deliberate. Her pulse spiked. She quickened her pace. The car crept closer. At the next corner, she slipped into an alley, pressed herself against the brick wall, and waited. The engine idled at the mouth of the alley. Then, silence. When she finally stepped back onto the street, the car was gone. But in the puddle at her feet, something floated, a small white petal, trembling in the water. A rose. She didn't know whether to feel comforted or hunted. Ever felt watched in your own life? Shanann used to think it was just paranoia, until shadows started whispering her name. In stories like this, awareness isn't fear. It's survival. Stay close, before the headlights find you. The morning Agnes didn't show up was the first morning Shanann's hands shook. It wasn't like her to worry, at least not over missed breakfasts. But Agnes was punctual, almost ritualistic. For 6 months, she'd arrived at the cafe by 8 a.m. sharp, a smile as delicate as porcelain and the same order on her lips. Asterisk, a waffle, black coffee, no cream. Asterisk. That morning, her table stayed empty. Shanann checked her phone, the clock, the door, then the street, just in case. No black SUVs, no familiar silhouette under the terrace umbrellas. Only the drizzle of early rain and the low hum of city life that suddenly felt too loud. By noon, dread had begun to bloom in her chest. By closing time, it was a vine, wrapping around her lungs. She told herself to wait. Maybe Agnes was resting. Maybe Alfredo had taken her somewhere safe. But when Shanann arrived the next morning and the chair by the window remained empty again, her heart knew. Something was wrong. It happened fast after that. At 9:17 a.m., the cafe door burst open with enough force to rattle the windows. Alfredo Hernandez stormed inside like a tempest in human form. His coat was soaked with rain and something darker, blood. A cut slashed across his cheek, still fresh. His men followed, their guns visible beneath their jackets, faces grim. Every customer froze mid-bite. The air thickened. Everyone out, Alfredo barked. No one argued. Chairs scraped, cups clattered. The bell above the door jingled frantically as the cafe emptied in seconds. Shanann stood behind the counter, pulse thrumming. "Where is she?" he demanded. "Who?" "My mother." The words cracked through the room like gunfire. Shanann's breath caught. "She hasn't been here since yesterday. I thought maybe she was with you." Alfredo slammed his hand on the counter hard enough to rattle the plates. "They took her," he said, voice low and trembling with fury. "From under my protection. From under yours." The accusation stung, though she knew it wasn't fair. Still, guilt coiled in her chest like smoke. "What happened?" she asked quietly. "Her apartment," he said. "Ransacked. No forced entry. No witnesses. Security cameras wiped. It's clean, too clean." He paced like a caged predator, blood dripping from his knuckles. "My men found traces, tire marks from a black van, northbound. That's all." Shanann tried to steady her voice. "You think it was another family?" His glare snapped to her. "Don't play dumb, Miss Price. You've seen the men who sit in your cafe every morning. You know the world my mother came from. They took her because of me, because I let her live like she was safe." He exhaled sharply, the fury in his chest warring with something else, fear. Real, human fear. "She trusted you," he said finally. "She talked to you when she wouldn't even speak to me." "She'll be okay," Shanann said automatically, though her voice trembled. His eyes locked on hers, sharp, desperate, searching for a truth he didn't believe in. "You don't know that." "No," she said, stepping forward. "But I know she's strong. And if you want to find her, you're going to need someone she'll trust when she sees them. That's not your men, Alfredo. That's me." He stared at her like she'd lost her mind. "You?" he said, disbelief cutting through the tension. "You're a waitress, not a soldier." "Maybe," she shot back, "but your mother trusted me with her mornings. With her fears. If she's alive, she'll trust me again, and that might be what keeps her that way. For a moment, the cafe was silent except for the sound of rain against the glass. Alfredo's jaw flexed. His hands curled into fists, then released. He turned away, pacing. She's all I have left, he muttered. The only good thing that ever came out of this life. Shanann had never seen him like this, stripped of armor, all raw edges and regret. The fear in him wasn't just for his mother. It was for what he'd become without her. He looked back at her finally. You have no idea what you're walking into. Then show me, she said. Something shifted in his eyes. Resignation, maybe, or something softer, flickering just for a second before he crushed it. He gave a sharp nod to one of his men. Get the car. The cafe was silent again once they left, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the wall clock. Shanann wiped her hands on her apron. Though they were already clean, her mind racing. Her reflection in the window looked different now. Harder, more determined. She thought of Agnes's warning. They will come for what he loves. Maybe that was happening already. Maybe she was next. When the black SUV pulled up outside, the door opened without a word. Alfredo stood beside it, a storm in human form. Eyes shadowed, jaw tight. Last chance, he said. You walk away now, you go back to waffles and small talk, and you pretend none of this ever happened. Shanann swallowed the fear clawing at her throat. And if I don't, then you're in it, he said. All the way. She hesitated only a second, then stepped forward. The interior smelled like leather and gun oil. Men in dark suits sat silently on either side. Rain streaked the tinted windows. As the car pulled away, Shanann looked back through the glass. The cafe, her small, safe world, was shrinking behind her, fading into the mist of dawn. Ahead, the city unfolded like a maze of danger and secrets. She didn't know where they were going, only that she was finally crossing the line she'd been circling for weeks. Alfredo broke the silence. You said she talked to you. What did she say? About what? About me. Shanann hesitated. That you were gentle once. That the world taught you to be cruel. He exhaled slowly, gaze fixed on the rain-streaked windshield. She always said that, like it was supposed to make me better. Maybe it still can, Shanann said. He turned to her, something unreadable flickering behind his eyes. Pain, maybe, or something dangerously close to hope. Don't make the mistake of thinking I can be redeemed, Miss Price, he said quietly. People like me don't get redemption. We get revenge. The SUV sped through the city streets, headlights cutting through fog and fear alike. Somewhere out there, Agnes Hernandez, the frail old woman who just wanted a quiet breakfast, was caught between the sins of her past and the loyalty of the people who loved her. And Shanann Price, a waitress with nothing left to lose, was about to dive headfirst into a world where kindness was both a weapon and weakness. By the time dawn broke, the convoy of black SUVs had left the city behind. The horizon was gray, the air thick with storm and silence. Alfredo leaned forward, murmuring orders into his phone. Shanann sat beside him, watching the sun struggle through the clouds. When the first ray of light hit the windshield, she caught her reflection in it, wide-eyed, steady, and unrecognizable. The girl who once served coffee to strangers was gone. The woman beside the devil was just beginning to exist. The night bled into morning without rest. By the time the convoy reached the docks, the city skyline had disappeared behind them, swallowed by fog and guilt. The air reeked of salt, rust, and diesel. Shanann had never seen this part of town before, and something about it felt deliberately forgotten, like the kind of place where bad things happened quietly. Alfredo's men fanned out wordlessly, their movements sharp and efficient. One of them, a man with a scar carved through his eyebrow, opened the back door for Alfredo. He stepped out first, all precision and control, then turned to Shanann. Stay close, he said. She followed him through rows of abandoned shipping containers, the clang of distant machinery echoing through the mist. The docks were alive with whispers, men exchanging envelopes, glances, and fear. "This is where your world lives?" she asked quietly. He didn't look at her. "This is where it hides." They reached a makeshift office at the far end of the pier. Inside, an informant waited, jittery, sweat glistening at his temples. Alfredo leaned over him, voice low, dangerous. "She's been taken to the ground," the man stammered. "No ransom demand yet. But word is, Torres, the rival, he wants leverage. Family leverage." Alfredo's jaw flexed. "Where?" The man hesitated. Alfredo's hand moved faster than Shanann could blink. A single strike, the thud of impact, the man gasping for air. "Where?" Alfredo repeated, quieter this time, which somehow made it worse. "Old property, the winery. Outside the city." Alfredo let him fall back against the chair, gasping. Then he turned to Shanann, and for the first time, she saw something raw flicker behind his control. Rage, yes, but also fear. "She always loved that place," he said softly. "It was hers once, before all of this." The drive out of the city was long and silent. Shanann sat beside him in the lead SUV, the hum of the engine a low heartbeat between them. Outside, the world blurred, endless highways, broken fences, rain that never seemed to stop. Alfredo hadn't spoken in nearly an hour. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, but his mind was far away. Finally, she broke the silence. "You said she loved that place. What was it?" He exhaled. "My father bought it after the war. Called it La Esperanza, hope." He gave a bitter laugh. "He turned it into a front for money laundering. When he died, I took it back, cleaned it up. For her. Thought maybe it would bring her peace. It didn't. I built this empire to protect her," he said, voice low. "And it only put her in danger." He looked at her then, not with the calculating gaze of the man who owned the city's fear, but with the hollow eyes of a son who had failed. For the first time, Shanann didn't see the devil everyone warned her about. She saw a man trapped in a kingdom of his own making. They reached the outskirts by dusk. The vineyard stretched across the valley, long dead, vines tangled, windows boarded, the winery itself a skeleton of brick and memory. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth and decay. Alfredo's men spread out in silence, flashlights cutting thin lines through the fog. Shanann stepped out, her shoes sinking slightly into the mud. The rain had stopped, but the world still felt heavy. "This place," she murmured. "It feels haunted." "It is," Alfredo said quietly, "by everything I destroyed trying to protect it." As they moved toward the main building, a gunshot cracked in the distance. The sound ricocheted through the valley. "Positions," one of the men barked. Shanann flinched as Alfredo pulled her against the wall, shielding her instinctively. His coat brushed her cheek, leather and smoke and adrenaline. "You shouldn't have come," he said, his voice rough. "I told you," she whispered. "She'll trust me before she'll trust anyone else." He turned to her, close enough that she could see the faint scar along his jaw. His eyes, usually cold and sharp, looked different in the half-light. "You don't belong in this world," he said. "Once you walk through that door, you don't come back the same." "Then maybe," she said softly, "someone needs to change it from the inside." For a long moment, neither of them moved. The rain began again, light and steady. Then Alfredo nodded, almost imperceptibly. "Stay behind me." They breached the winery like ghosts. The old building groaned under the weight of their footsteps. Wine barrels lay shattered, glass glittering like frost. The air smelled of mold and gun oil. Alfredo's men cleared room after room, until they reached the cellar door. He raised a hand. "She's here." Shanann felt her heart hammer. She wanted to run, to find Agnes, to end this. But the look in Alfredo's eyes, a mix of dread and devotion, held her still. He descended first. She followed. The cellar was dim, lit by a single hanging bulb. Crates lined the walls. And in the center, an empty chair, ropes cut, a cup of water half spilled on the floor. "She was here," Alfredo muttered, scanning the scene. On the table beside the chair was a note, written in the same sharp handwriting as the red warning envelope. You can't protect what's already gone. Alfredo's hand trembled as he crumpled the paper. For a split second, his composure cracked. Get out, he growled to his men. Now. When they left, Shanann stayed. He pressed his palms against the table, head bowed, breath unsteady. A trickle of blood ran down his forearm from a cut she hadn't noticed before. Without thinking, she stepped closer. You're bleeding. He didn't move as she took a clean cloth from her bag and wrapped it around the wound. Her hands were steady, her touch gentle. He stared at her, not at her face, but at the space between them, the strange calm she brought with her. When she tightened the knot on his bandage, their eyes met. He looked away first. I don't remember the last time someone touched me without wanting something, he said quietly. Shanann didn't respond. She didn't need to. The silence between them said everything. By the time they emerged from the cellar, dawn was bleeding into the horizon. Alfredo gave his men new orders, faster, broader. His voice was cold again, but something had shifted. As Shanann climbed back into the SUV, she glanced through the cracked window of the old winery one last time. Somewhere, out there in the fog, Agnes Hernandez was still alive and waiting. Shanann didn't know if she'd survive what came next, but she knew she couldn't walk away. Not now. Not when even the devil himself had started to believe in something fragile again. The storm broke just before dawn. Lightning split the clouds over the valley, throwing flashes of silver across the dead vines and crumbling stone. Rain hammered the broken roof of La Esperanza like a war drum. Shanann had barely slept. Every creak in the dark, every whisper over the comms from Alfredo's men, made her pulse jump. The winery looked different in daylight, hungrier somehow, as if it knew what was coming. Alfredo stood a few yards away, talking to his lieutenant in sharp, low tones. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, the bandage she'd tied around his arm already streaked with blood and mud. He caught her watching. You stay in the car when we move, he said, his voice like gravel. She shook her head. You know I can't do that. He took a step closer, the rain dripping from his hair. You think this is a movie, Shanann? You think kindness will save you in there? No, she said quietly. But it might save her. Something flickered across his face. Pride, anger, something else he didn't want to name. He turned away before it could take root. Fine, he muttered. Stay behind me. And if I tell you to run, you run. The first gunshot came seconds later. It echoed through the valley, sharp and close. Alfredo's men moved instantly, spreading into position. Another burst followed, automatic fire this time. Go, Alfredo barked. The SUVs roared forward, tires slicing through the mud. Shanann crouched low as they reached the winery's main gate. Metal screamed as the first vehicle smashed through. The air filled with smoke, the smell of gunpowder, and rain-slick earth. Inside the compound, chaos erupted. Shadows darted between buildings, muzzle flashes lighting the storm like fireworks. Shanann's heartbeat synced with the violence, fast, erratic, unrelenting. Alfredo leapt from the SUV, pistol drawn. His movements were precise, practiced, an artist of destruction. He didn't hesitate, didn't flinch. Each step was controlled fury. She wanted to close her eyes, but couldn't. There was something terrible and mesmerizing about watching him fight. Not the violence itself, but the purpose behind it. Every shot, every strike, was driven by fear for his mother. She slipped away during the confusion, heart pounding. The cellar. Agnes had mentioned it once, calling it her quiet place when she used to visit the vineyard. Shanann remembered. She followed that memory through the storm. The back door was unguarded. Inside, the air was cold and still. The faint smell of wine lingered under the damp rot. Shanann crept down the stairs, her flashlight trembling in her grip. The narrow hallway opened into a wide cellar lined with empty barrels. A single bulb flickered overhead, and there, beneath it, sat Agnes. She was tied to a chair, hands bound, her face pale but calm. Her lips moved in silent prayer. "Agnes," Shanann whispered. The old woman's eyes snapped open, and tears filled them instantly. "Child," she breathed, "you shouldn't be here." Before Shanann could answer, a voice echoed from the shadows. "Well, isn't this touching?" A man stepped into the light, his tailored suit soaked with blood and rain. His hair was slicked back, his smile a razor's edge. He was older than Alfredo, but carried the same dangerous composure, the kind that came from commanding death too often. "I was wondering what kind of woman could make Alfredo Hernandez lose his mind," he said. "Now I see. A waitress. How poetic." Shanann's pulse spiked. "Let her go." The man laughed softly. "You have spirit. He'll like that. You know, when he burned down my safe house, I almost admired him. But this," he gestured to Agnes, "this was his weakness. And now," he stepped closer, his boots crunching on broken glass. "You're his new one." Shanann forced herself not to move, not to show fear. "If you hurt her, he'll kill you." "Oh, I know," the man said, grinning. "That's the point. He'd burn the world for her." He tilted his head, eyes narrowing. "Now he'll burn it for you." The words hit like a slap. Footsteps thundered upstairs, heavy, fast, closing in. The rival turned toward the door just as it exploded inward. Alfredo stormed through the smoke like a ghost in a storm. His eyes were wild, his gun already raised. The rival turned his weapon, but Alfredo fired first. One shot. Clean. Final. The man fell, his smile frozen mid-taunt. For a moment, there was only silence, the kind that follows thunder. Then Alfredo was at his mother's side, cutting the ropes, his hands shaking. "Mama," he whispered, the word breaking something in him. Agnes touched his face, her fingers trembling. "You came." "Always," he said. Shanann watched from the corner, heart pounding. The sight was raw, power stripped bare. When he finally looked up, his eyes found her through the haze. For a second, the room disappeared. He crossed to her, his face unreadable. Then, without a word, he held out his pistol, grip first. She hesitated. "I don't." "For next time," he said softly. Her breath caught. The gesture was heavy with meaning, not violence, but trust, respect, a quiet acknowledgement that she had walked into his world and not flinched. Rain hammered the roof again, louder this time. Outside, sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Police, maybe, or something worse. Alfredo's men began shouting orders, moving fast. He turned to Shanann, his expression unreadable. "You shouldn't have come," he said. "And if I hadn't." He looked back at Agnes, then at the dead man on the floor. "Then I'd have nothing left to fight for." They left the winery just as the sky began to pale. Agnes sat quietly in the back seat, wrapped in a blanket, her eyes closed. Shanann sat beside her, still clutching the gun he'd given her. Alfredo drove in silence, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Rainwater streaked down the windshield, blurring the world outside into a wash of gray. For a long time, no one spoke. Then Shanann said softly, "You saved her." He didn't look at her. "I destroyed half my life to do it. She's alive. That's what matters." Alfredo exhaled, a sound that was part laugh, part sigh. "You really believe there's a difference between saving and destroying, don't you?" She met his gaze in the rearview mirror. "I have to." He held her eyes for a heartbeat too long before turning back to the road. By the time they reached the city limits, dawn had broken fully. The black SUVs slowed, blending back into morning traffic as if the night had never happened. But Shanann knew better. The world had changed. Not because of the gunfire or the bodies left behind, but because, for the first time, Alfredo Hernandez had chosen mercy over rage. And somewhere deep inside, the man who'd once been called the devil had felt something human again. People fall every day because they never recognize redemption when it's staring them in the face. Alfredo almost missed his. Shanann nearly died for hers. Don't scroll past stories like this. Stay and see how even the darkest hearts find light when someone dares to believe they can. It was 3 weeks before the cafe reopened. The closed for repairs sign had hung in the window far longer than anyone expected, though few in the neighborhood dared to ask why. When the doors finally opened again, the place looked the same, but felt different. The air was heavier, quieter. The checkered tables were newly polished, but the laughter hadn't yet returned. The regulars came back in cautious trickles, whispering rumors about the night the black SUVs flooded the street and how the kind waitress vanished for days after. They didn't know what had really happened, and Shanann preferred to keep it that way. The cafe was her sanctuary again, though it no longer belonged solely to her. It had become something else, a crossroads between worlds. The coffee brewed stronger. The waffles came smaller. And every morning, two of Alfredo's men occupied a corner booth, pretending to read newspapers, eyes on the door. It was security, they said. Protection. But Shanann knew it was also a message. Agnes returned the first Friday morning after reopening. Shanann almost didn't recognize her at first. The old woman moved slower now, leaning heavily on a cane. Her face was paler, her voice thinner, but her eyes, kind, knowing, alive, were the same. She smiled faintly when she saw Shanann. "You kept my table." "Of course," Shanann said, her voice trembling despite her smile. "Always." As she set down the plate, one waffle, black coffee, no cream, Agnes caught her hand. "You were brave," she said softly. "Braver than I ever was." Shanann shook her head. "I was terrified. That's what makes it real." The two women shared a quiet moment, the kind that carried more weight than words. Then Agnes looked toward the door, as if expecting someone. He came on the third day. Alfredo entered quietly, dressed simply in a dark jacket. No entourage this time. His presence still carried weight, the kind that shifted the air in a room, but something in him had softened. He didn't look like the man who'd stormed the cafe weeks earlier, dripping blood and rage. He looked tired, human. He nodded at Shanann as he passed, but didn't sit with his mother. Instead, he took a corner seat by the window, where he could watch them without being seen. It became a pattern. Every few mornings, he would come, never at the same time, never with fanfare. He'd order espresso, drink half of it, and leave without a word. Agnes never acknowledged him, but Shanann noticed how her hands trembled less on those mornings, how her eyes softened just slightly. Each time he left, he'd pause by the counter, his gaze meeting Shanann's for a fraction of a second, something like gratitude flickering behind the restraint. One gray morning, when the city was waking under a soft drizzle, Shanann decided to change things. Agnes sat in her usual spot, quietly tracing her finger around her coffee cup. Alfredo was in his corner again, unreadable behind his glass of espresso. Shanann carried the tray to Agnes's table, set down the plate, and then, deliberately, placed a second cup of coffee across from her. Agnes looked up, her brows lifted in silent understanding. Then Shanann turned, met Alfredo's gaze across the cafe, and nodded once toward the empty chair. For a long moment, he didn't move. The cafe held its breath. Then, slowly he stood. The sound of his footsteps was soft, but to Shanann, it echoed louder than any gunfire. He crossed the room, stopped at his mother's table, and sat down. Agnes reached across and took his hand. No words were spoken. None were needed. In that fragile silence, a decade of anger, grief, and distance seemed to dissolve. The world outside the cafe moved on. Taxis honking, rain falling, people rushing. But inside, time simply stopped. Shanann turned away, blinking back tears she didn't quite understand. Later that afternoon, as the last customers left and the hum of the city faded to a lull, she stood by the window, watching the light fade across the cobblestones. Agnes had gone home hours ago, escorted gently by Alfredo himself. The cafe was quiet again, save for the soft clatter of dishes and the low hum of the ceiling fan. Shanann began to wipe the tables, her movements slow, methodical. Her reflection in the glass looked older somehow, not in years, but in the weight behind her eyes. She had lived through fear, loss, and fire, and yet, here she was, still standing, still kind. Kindness cost me peace, but it gave me purpose. I thought I was serving waffles. Turns out, I was serving destiny. Outside, the sound of engines rumbled faintly through the rain. 5 black SUVs idled along the street, their lights soft and steady. Once, their presence would have frozen her with fear. Now, they felt almost protective. The men inside didn't come for her anymore. They came for who she represented, the bridge between the dark and the light, between a mother and her son, between the world Alfredo had built and the world he was beginning to rebuild. She turned off the lights one by one, the cafe sinking into a warm dusk glow. Then she stepped outside, locking the door behind her. Alfredo's driver nodded as she passed, a silent acknowledgement, not of rank, but of respect. The rain had stopped. The air was clean, sharp, alive. Shanann walked down the street toward home, her shoes splashing lightly in the shallow puddles. Behind her, the cafe windows gleamed faintly, golden against the gray. For the first time in months, the city didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a promise. 5 black SUVs remained parked outside the cafe, no longer symbols of fear, but sentinels of peace. Inside, at a corner table, 2 empty coffee cups cooled slowly beside a plate with crumbs of a shared waffle. And on the door, written in simple chalk, were the words Shanann had added that morning. Open daily, because kindness never closes. Even in the darkest places, light finds its way through the cracks. Shanann learned that redemption doesn't come in grand gestures. It comes in small acts that change everything. Don't look away from stories like this. Sometimes, they remind us that peace can grow from the unlikeliest soil. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new one.